Welcome to Portals of Perception and to the Universalis Project number 2. I'm here with Henney and Kyriaki Nikandrou. And we are ready together to embark on this next exploration into the Universalis Project. We just actually recorded episode 1, so it's still all fresh. And by way of bridging, I will ask Kyriaki, Karen, what would you offer as a bridging? In this first one, we traced my journey story and as an origin story for the Universalis Project and for specifically what we are about to embark on this episode 2, where we will look at space making and the art of contemplation. And so what would you offer that's alive for you as a bridging from part one to part 2?
Well, I can start. There are two things that impressed me very much. The one thing is that somehow our personal destinies or our personal stories are maybe more than that, are maybe something, there is a sense that something else is driving them, or they can be a pathway through which new intelligence can come. So it's a great exampleship, this story, how this permanent inquiry about the Homo Universalis and the future rose in you. And the second thing is that in a way you came to it after facing a stop situation in you or the end of your map, or you also have been in a position to witness and experience a lot of stop situations, maybe through your work in the business world, in various faculties with various companies, and also at the same time having an esoteric journey. So this also is for me an exampleship that maybe there is never an end. There is only the end, and then there is the elevation. So I find hope in it that what we may experience as a stop situation or as the end or reaching the limits, our limits, maybe it's a reminder that something we must change something to go higher, to find new space, to go above and beyond. And I find hope in that.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I don't often use the term that's very popularized in the world, in the idea of the dark night of the soul. But when you and I, Kyriaki, when we embarked on writing together the 3 journeys, we didn't talk there so much about stop situations, but if somebody wants to re-thread through that writing, it describes a variety of stop situations. And there is something potent in what you're offering, which is the awareness that, when you come to the end of the road and there is no continuance or obvious continuation, because it is literally land's end, you're at a cliff and there is no way to proceed the journey. With that journey, sometime right there, a new journey begins. That has been my experience. I have possibly experienced 5 or 6 or 7 periods in my journey that I hinted to on the first episode that I describe as the walk in the desert, which often for me has been more a better description than a dark night of the soul, but both work. So thank you for offering that bridge. Karen, what would you offer as a bridging from the first journey, first exploration into part 2?
Hello Aviv, hello Kyriaki for part 2. Similar to stop situations, but the other side of the coin, which you've just touched on, is the nature of moments that are very catalytic. And I think it's to do with, as you were describing everything about your journey, there was this parallel because of what all the different situations would allow in the catalytic sense. And, of finding the pathway through, or finding the elevation, or what was required, or the something that took the journey on to the next step. And I think the other aspect is, and that weaves through everything that you've been saying, is to do with if anybody wishes to approach something as vast, which at best we would only be touching the very edge of, in terms of the human universalis, or the Homo Universalis. It's vast, it's multiple, it's complex, and it's a lifetime journey to get to the foothills. And I think anything to do with, well, the story that you've told previously in part 1, and our journeys and our friends' journeys, they are equally multiple and vast and unique and different. And we would all, in a way, have slightly different access and routes into unlocking a facet, an aspect of it. But it's a huge assumption to think that one can approach such a journey without having embarked on, I'm not saying one needs necessarily a lifetime of dark nights of the soul or such like, but certain foundations, certain assemblies, certain awarenesses of how the human works on, from the physical level through to spiritual levels, and all stops in between according to one's training, learning, inclinations. So that's painting a sort of broader picture of where we are at this point.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Karen. Let me try and thread through 3 or 4 core premises you articulated. Number 1, the validity of me telling a story is not trying to enroll anybody else in my story, but to inspire people into their discovery of significance in their journeys. That's number 1. Number 2 is a pretty audacious suggestion. I'm going to be a little more explicit inside what was latent in what you said, which is that we are suggesting that if you follow the idea that we all are connected as humans, and so therefore what happens in one person in one way or another is available for other people. And so therefore inside it, if we are sensing and suggesting that we are living into a time of profound change, catalytic, profound, transformative change, and with new evolutionary potential, then implicit in that is that we may each one of us in our own way, choose to look at our individual journeys and rewrite the significance and the meaning of what occurred to us inside that context. And thirdly, that to do so requires some commitment, some dedication. It's not something you just pick up on a Monday morning and play with for half an hour and think that's going to be sufficient. It's going to require you to practice certain dedication and devotion, and that's not so easy to communicate in an instant everything age where people now have the Amazon experience and the Google experience, and now the Chat GPT and other experiences. You can type a quick question and get a book reply instantly and claim that you wrote a book. That is technology enabled, wonderful, but if you are to source an originating discovery in yourself, you're not going to be able to do so on ChatGPT. It gives me actually a point to make this point, which is those technological tools based on AI, how do they work? Well, they teach the machine based on data sets of the past. So by definition, everything that it will spit out has been defined by what has occurred before. So if humanity surrenders completely to the idea that the AI is smarter than us, by definition, we say that there is no new original discovery and knowledge that can appear. I don't believe that that's what the engineers in OpenAI or in Google or in Microsoft, that's what they say. But if they follow the implication of what the technology offers, well, that's the risk, that we will raise new generations of people that actually, number one, believe that everything can be technologically accessed, but number two, more importantly, that an original human experience, new evolutionary original arising cannot occur in human life. And we defy that, I defy that strongly. Now, the fourth premise that you offered was that to do so alongside the dedication of your personal application, which is very much what Kyriaki spoke to as well, that sense of application, there is going to be a need to inquire into and contemplate about the natural laws. We've spoken quite a bit about natural laws and the natural principles, the natural operating system by which this universe operates. We've spoken quite a bit about this with my friend David on Current Openings, David Francis. And so I would just urge that we pay attention to what you offer there. And I just demonstrated something that I will circle back to at the end when I mention at the end of this session today, this exploration into loom work. I'll describe that one of the applications is loom listening. I listen to you in the activated loom in my system, so I'm able to hear what you said and harvest the four teachings, the four nuggets that were implicit in what you offered, which is my seeding of what we're about to embark on when we invite this number 2 the Universalis Project number 2. First, the Epoch Conundrum, which we left not fully revealed. What was that about in episode 1? And then going into loom work and actually the art of contemplation as part of the technology of space making. All that is what we are embarking on today. So just to reground us, that's one of the last slides we looked at. This was the trace that we explored on episode 1, the journey trace. And I bring it up again because it landed with this inquiry. So what was the Epoch culmination conundrum about? And why was it so necessary in the context of it to bring up the space-making challenge so much that we are proposing that when we introduce the 1,000 faces of the Homo Universalis prospect, that space-making is indeed an important element in it. Okay, well, so obviously, as I offered on the first episode, we spent 300 hours in live large Zoom events over the last 3 years, diving deep into the Epoch culmination journey. And I calculated that I probably spent 3,000 to 4,000 hours behind in my contemplative work. So all I will do now is I will just bring on the screen some of what I describe as permanent line inquiries that fueled and inspired and infused this work. The first is the permanent line inquiry of what the bleep is going on. This was very much the inquiry that, as I described the trace, was part of the experience of the 2012-2013 journey, and then through the various explorations into stop situations. What are stop situations? Why were stop situations so salient in this time, actually, when we are breaking stop situations? Because the whole point of the exploration of stop situations is because some of these are opening up, and we humans are actually summoned or invited to live into the new space that's opening up. So that was part of what the bleep is going on. And inside it, how are we humans evolving now? What new capacities and capabilities are coming online for us? And what is therefore inside it the updated operating system of life? So if we are emerging to discover a much larger prospect of what human life is about, if we are in the early days of what may be 1,000 years of new human flourishing, of the possibilities of human into universal life, what is the operating system of life? What is the operating system of leadership? What is the operating system of every facet and every domain inside this new context? And sure, when you ask this question, somebody can say, well, but what are you talking about? This world is full of torment and struggle. Well, exactly. Part of what we are describing is that the torment and the struggle and the chaos and the breakdown of what appear to be some of the greatest achievements of the modernity projects in especially the global institutions of liberal free market economies, that paradigm is becoming unraveled and is unraveling and is getting unstuck because some of the core premises that enabled it have reached a dead end. A dead end is a different name to a stop situation. And so why are we receiving now profoundly potent new perceptions inside it all? This arose from the study of the perception stop situation, and why was it now melting away? How is this part of the new evolution that's arising? And when we talk about perception, what do we actually mean? What is the anatomy of perception? Because we're surely hinting to more than you read a line or even a paragraph in a book or in a Google search. That's not a new perception. That may be new information. So what's the difference between information and perception, and how can perception be an unlocking for latent human capacity, and in the reverse, how can unlocking new human capacity lead to new and profound perceptions? And inside it all, what was the evolutionary purpose of the last 3,500 years, those 3,500 years epochal journey? In flying upside down metaphysical sense, if you were to imagine yourself from the universe at large, looking back at planet Earth, whatever, from the deeper in the galaxy, or from the constellation of Orion, or from Andromeda, wherever, if you look from the deep in the universe back into the planet, and you are a sentient, intelligent being. Let's just imagine this as a thought experiment. And you have a premise that says human life on planet Earth is gradually journeying to become ready, to become initiated into embracing broader universal life, but not just in the sense of the universe out there, but also in the sense of the universe down here. Insofar as when we imagine this, as you suggested, Karen, in a non-linear way, well, whatever is in the universe out there is also in fractal form right here inside us and in between us. So if you are looking from that point of view and you say the human had to journey through profound struggle, all the way from the Bronze Age through what occurred profoundly in the story of ancient Greece, and what was that about, and the change of the transition that came through the axial revolution, and the new operating system that the axial revolution brought, and how it expressed itself slightly differently in the East and in the West, and what was that about. But then what was activated through to the modern and the postmodern project? What was that journey about? And both in the exterior and also in the interior, what was it that was meant to come online and to be activated in the human as a facility to engage with universal life? All that was part of the inquiry. And therefore, why and how is the epoch culminating and emancipating? How much is it a phenomenon that's occurring outside of us? How much is it a phenomenon that's occurring inside us through our own interior process? And or is it the case that it's co-arising? That is to say, it's arising inside every individual, inside our relational space, communal space, all the way to the socio-economic, global, geopolitical story. And why is it such a complex and chaotic story? Why is it not rather a linear journey from one point to another point? What's the design feature in this crucible of change and diversity of experimentation, where different systems and different countries and different people and different communities get to prototype the arising now in an adjacent way? And how and in what way each of these endeavors potentially when they couple their endeavors with that consciousness and awareness, they can become an imaginal cell through which, with which the epoch can emancipate, by which we mean one epoch can be hospiced and released, and a new epoch, potentially the next 1,000 years, can be birthed. All those inquiries were part of the contemplative journey of the epoch culmination. And inside it all, what are some of the new faculties and new capabilities that are opening up, and what's the new development potential that is being unlocked and is coming online for individuals and for communities? And how are we experiencing it? Not just as a concept, but in an embodied way, in a tangible, actual, psychospiritual, energetic, transformative way. All of that was part of the epoch culmination, conundrum and inquiry. And most critically, how can we make ourselves available for the upgrade of the human model? If part of the suggestion is that the human model itself, the permission to be human into this time, is itself a process of evolving evolution, what might be necessary to help us make ourselves available? And why it is so practically difficult? Because even if you just bring one line of inquiry, which is, so with the advent of personal computers in the last decade or so of the 20th century, the vision at the time was, okay, computers will do a lot for us, so we will have plenty of time for leisure and so on and so forth. But in actuality, within 2 decades, we found ourselves that we have less time to think, less time to read books, less time to be in conversation with each other, and less time to be in deep inquiry and contemplation about these kind of inquiries. And that, in part, is where the inquiry we reflected on in the previous episode about the egregoric nature of the lower occult and how that even gets its access to the human psyche and to human process and to human consciousness through technology and through the engineering of social media, where what we're describing simply is suggesting that the most sacred and precious property of human life is its consciousness and its attention. And right as the human is coming into discovering and unlocking universal consciousness and attention, right along these decades, we have the powers that unlock what is called the attention economy, where we have technological tools that essentially are wired with very sophisticated and smart algorithms to capture our attentions and to capture the attentions of young children who are vulnerable in the face of those technologies, because they don't have yet the self-insight and the self-knowledge and the sense of purpose about what life is about for them. And so actually the fact that of the concurrency is a proof point, is the very proof point of what we are saying. The fact that those technologies and those challenges, technologically speaking, relationally speaking, geopolitically conflict-wise speaking, that all that is occurring all at the same time is part of the epoch culmination story, and mapping that and discovering where in that do we see the fractal of the red pattern and the orange pattern and the yellow pattern that belongs in a different conversation another time, perhaps inside the Universalis research or somewhere else. All that was part of the epoch culmination journey, and inside it all, what new evolutionary possibilities are now emerging for us as individuals, as collectives, as a as the human species at large, and what it all portends for us. So let me pause here and just give you a chance to speak to that. You have, together with nearly 200 people, partnered on this journey with me. I never pretended to be the teacher into the journey. What we said was that it was going to be a collective, mutualized endeavor in which I was going to be the journey Sherpa. So I offered a lot of guidance and facilitation and orchestration and choreography for the experience. Inside it, the whole premise was actually that part of the Epoch transition it's not a solo journey. It's a mutualized discovery. We actually need to discover the luminary possibility of life, not as solo luminaries, but as collective, mutualized luminosity that is emergent in the conversational, dialogue, explorative, contemplative journey that we generate. So I'm going to pause here and let you play jazz with what I just placed in front of you. Once again, you had no idea what I was going to present to you. Nothing here is rehearsed. This is us just going live. And I literally assembled these slides in the last 24, 48 hours because I realized it was going to be important to somehow provide a contextual story of why the Universalis Project and why making space. So please.
Well, to start at the beginning, I think right at the very beginning of the Epoch culmination Conundrum, you introduced loom technology.
That's actually the whole next piece I'm going into. So please.
I'll just say a very little bit then, because I was just totally, that was when I think I first met you, the very first one of these epochal days on the mountain. And I just loved this technology because it was a way, I mean, at the moment I'm looking at this loom and there's a lot of, there's a lot of I prefer it without the loom. It's just the fact that there are so many threads, there's so much in it, and you could look at just take one box or one concept or one thought, which are huge. And then by drawing together all the threads that maybe they come from reference or intuitions or wherever, and beginning to place them. I'm hesitant now to say too much because you said you want to talk about it more, but just to say that it opened up ways of organizing thoughts that allowed something else to come and join, which was a new perception, a new thought. And suddenly, I think there was an engagement. It was a practical way of actually engaging my life with whatever particular domain, area, work I was wanting to open up. So that's one thread. The other thread that I was thinking about is, and I'm not going to touch any of the boxes you're talking about, they're too vast. But I was thinking a bit about what I said before about writing this paper on sublimation. It wasn't about, not sublimation, about superimposure. I realized one of the reasons I was doing it was to do with getting to a closer in awareness of the choices that I actually made myself by sorting through the threads. And now I've lost the thread of where I was going. And it's all the way along these journeys, I think the increasing awareness of this individual life and the choices. Oh yeah, this is what I want to say. It's to do with the inner awareness of the weights, the center of gravities, and the weights and balances within my conscious mind, and how that isn't. There's a point in life where you recognize that you can allow things to diminish and you can allow things to strengthen. And you have that inner choice about that. And I think the whole thing about sublimation was to get to that point in my own adding up. And I think a lot of the aspects that you put on the different boxes, they're all in subtle, different, nuanced ways to do with that fine line between where you can strengthen something that at some point, and it won't necessarily be to do with, won't be my choice, it'll be at some point where it is strong enough that something external to my life may recognize it, may want to join it, may want to enhance it. And that's to do with the conduit, being able to join something. And I think a lot of the journey of the Epoch culmination is to do with these subtle weights and balances of all sorts of different facets, to do with allowing that joining between the human and a higher realm. But it can only happen through the two things, the sort of point of emergence of where humanity as an evolutionary mutuality, or the whole race, as it were, has emerged to a point, and the permissions from the universe are more, that they are not finite. They are always accruing and accelerating, I believe. So there's this whole journey of the joining of the two on the sort of mega scale, but also on the individual, in each individual life. And it comes back to what Kyriaki was saying, what you're saying about responsibility. And it's every moment of the day. And that's part of the space making, because you make space, you look for opportunities to create. That's part of being a space maker, looking for opportunities.
Thank you very much, Karen. And it's I've always thought that part of why you got so activated in your faculty and possibility with the introduction of loom work is because you are yourself a designer in one part of you, and you have the capacity to see many, many different facets, both in art, but also in any domain of inquiry. So it was like, for you, it was like a glove into the hand. It's well, yeah, sure, that's what I do. I've done it all my life. I just didn't know that that's a way to use this tool. And it's a very natural thing. Now, so I'm actually about to tell the origin story that you have heard of how the loom work arose in the first place. And then I will run through the first way we introduced loom back in 2020 and offer some bits about it. And that will be it for today. But before I do, please, Kyriaki.
Yes. I want to say that there are many. First of all, thank you, Karen, for introducing this aspect. But I was thinking about the Epoch culmination journey, that there are many ways to look at the journey of the unfolding of the human story. And they're all valid and important. Like, for instance, there is the lens of how the economies evolved, so the economic history, or one can see how the ethics evolved in different times, different cultures, or how the psychology of people changed, or the history of art, the history of music, which the history of the sources, which are also valid ways to extract a sense of this journey of the human. But what I find fascinating about the Epoch culmination, at least for me, it was very real. It apart from the fact that it addresses the way the human consciousness evolved, which in a way encapsulates everything. The fact that the epoch culminates in us, inside us. It's not something external that you study. For instance, Rome is not something external. That what the Romans did, they did this, they did the laws, they did Colosseum, they built a big empire, the army, the roads. It's not this. It's what is the Rome in us, and what is Egypt in us. And where is it in our psyche? Where is it in the way we think? Where is it in the way we live? Where is it in the way we relate? And the same, let's say, with various epochs and various awakenings of the human consciousness, let's say the Renaissance or the Olympic Games in Greece or the Eleusinian mysteries or whatever. What did the religions? So when we started the period of religions, I did a very big research, and it was not something far out of me. It's where is it in me? So I think this is a completely revolutionary way to see the unfolding of the human story and the awakening of the human consciousness. And it's not one step, two step, three, everything. It's integrated with everything. And there are reappearing circles. So we have, let's say, the red fractal in the green epoch, or the green fractal in the red epoch. And you can see that everywhere. So I find it completely revelatory, exciting, and it's not something dead. For me, it's very actual. It's very real. It's almost like speaking, speaking through Rome, for instance, or speaking with Rome, so it's a very alive and experiential approach, let's say, or experience. I would say. I wouldn't even say approach. It's just experience. So,
yeah, thank you. Thank you, Kyriaki. This is so beautifully described in what you are offering, because the way of the journey has been, as you said, well, where is the Marcus Aurelius inside each one of us? And can we find Marcus Aurelius? And can we find the Marcus Aurelius and bring Marcus Aurelius in us up to date? What would Marcus Aurelius be saying today? What would be the Magna Carta of today? Where and how must the Magna Carta be updated? So the distinction you're offering is so potently live because of these two additional dimensions that are implicit in what you're saying. I will render the implicit explicit. The first is that we are not studying history by going down the timeline. We're actually bringing history into up to date in us today. We're not studying history as a property outside of us. We're seeing ourselves as the product of all that occurred in the human story. And here comes the second thing that was central to this journey. Therefore, we continually asked ourselves, if we study anything, as an example, you mentioned Rome, well, what might be a way to be dialectic in one's awareness and consciousness about Rome and about the fractal of the orange that Rome represented in the sevenfold progression and how it reappeared later in the British Empire. How are we to be dialectic about that? So that journey, by the way, never ends. It's a journey that continues as we're describing that what this period of transformation is, these coming decades, it's a period of time when we are trying to let that wonderful and inspirational and at the same time injurious and painful and tormented past, both the light and the shadow throughout the ages, we are looking to facilitate in our communal, individual and communal and process consciousness a space where what has no functional use in the future can be laid to rest, can be hospiced. And what has functional role in facilitating a new emergence, let us harvest and harness it, again, not by way of let that define and limit what may arise, because we are partly saying as the human it enters in a fuller engagement with the universe, the future is not defined by the past. The future is a universal origination that's emancipating through human consciousness. So this is where there is an interesting conundrum. We want to be students of the past, but so much of the study of the past is putting things in boxes and learning by rote to be able to pass an exam and learning it as something that occurs outside of you. What you are describing and inviting us is into, no, can I experience these traces? Can I experience the pain? Can I experience the struggle of the people of the 4th century and the 11th century? And what occurred in 13 all the way to the transition of the 14th century, right? And the rise of the Renaissance. What was it that was occurring there? And can we experience the unlocking of the printing press? Anyway, I'm getting off track because that is so much in what you offered. So now it is because of all that we said making space was going to become such a critical element of the work, because how do we make space for this tremendous uplift in energy potential and knowledge to find us? Because, well, so what we're hinting in that is that knowledge, again, is not what is written in books or what is written in Wikipedia or what is you can find in a Google search. No, the way we appreciate knowledge in this context is truly the energy potential that knowledge unlocks. So when we begin to metabolize and dialysize the human journey in the way you're describing, Kyriaki, we will experience pain and depression and stress and anxiety, and we will experience the metabolism and the dialysis of those and the unlock of potential that's been arrested throughout the ages, that's looking to be harvested and harnessed into this time. So that's where we said, okay, so how do we make space for this tremendous uplift in energy potential and knowledge to find us? That was a central question that I faced when I was on the run-up to the first a large Zoom event where we were going to embark on the Epoch culmination, because I realized that we were going to meet with people that each in their own right, being in their own journey. And we were going to ask people to enter this not as students, not as people coming to learn from me, but as co-creators inside a mutual search, and that was going to require us to make space for all this in ourselves and with each other. And I contemplated deeply what would be a way to approach this process challenge. And what occurred to me was that we would need to introduce it's not really the art, it's the arts, multiple arts of contemplation. The why of contemplation, the what of contemplation, the how of contemplation. And very much do so inside that context by bringing also the origin story of loom work, because I was going to introduce loom work as the second technology into the art of contemplation. The first technology we already mentioned at the beginning of this conversation and earlier on the first episode of the Universalis Project, which is what I describe as permanent line inquiry, by which we mean inquiries that live inside you, that you live inside of permanently, even when you're asleep. So it's not an intellectual, mental thing. There is a devotional quest that you breathe to life with permanent line inquiries. And that was technology 1 into the art of contemplation. And technology 2 was loom work. So that's us answering the challenge that arose by this trace. And to do so, I contemplated what would be a way to address this challenge here. How will I facilitate and choreograph something that will help us create space, make space? And in my contemplation, I sourced the origin story of loom work and what that meant to me, because it by that time became so ingrained in my system that I wasn't even aware in a definitive way that is how I was processing. So I needed to actually retrace the story such that it could become a facility, a conductive facility for others. And so I decided I was going to bring the origin story of loom work. And I'm just going to, for that, remove the slide so I can tell it without a slide on the screen. So this occurred in December of 1992. And I participated in a special conference with a very special teacher. And we were for a couple, 3 days into that conference, retreat kind of conference, small group of us. And on that day, it was called out as a break day, a day where there was not going to be a meeting. So everybody could be a bit in the process and then metabolize what occurred in the first 3 days. And well, I did what I often used to do in situations like this. I would go to a place where I could best be in the puzzling of what occurred. So I went to that little meeting place, little office space, which was literally a sanctuary that was built to facilitate that. It was a little space that created an ecology for the conference, for that retreat conference. And I would often do that. I'd often either come hours before a meeting was going to happen, or I would stay sometime hours after, because I always try to puzzle things. And on that day, nothing was planned, so I showed up and I was working my way and I was writing things. And all of a sudden, the door was open. And that great teacher that I came to study and learn from walked in, which was a surprise because it was announced as a day where nothing was going to happen. And he walked in and he looked at me for a brief second and he said, "You're trying to puzzle things, aren't you? You're trying to puzzle things." I said, "Okay, I'm going to teach you how to think about things. I know you always try to figure things out. You always try to think about things. I'm going to teach you how to think about things." And he said, the problem with people, when they try to think about anything, whether it's practical problem or issue in their life or issue in their relationship or even a philosophical or theological issue, the problem with people is they often go head on into that one issue and try to solve it and address it head on. That's not actually the way to think about things. He said the way to think about something is you've got to surround whatever it is you're trying to think about with all the related spaces around it. In other words, he said, never again, never ever again should you approach any subject to think about in singular terms. What you have to do, and he proceeded to the board and he drew 9 boxes on the board. And so I'm now going to bring it up on a screen because I want to show you what he did and then explain what happened in that. So he said to me, "Look, you should never think about anything in any singular fashion." He said, "Let me give you an example." He said, "I am going to show you how I think about the situation I now face." So he wrote this on the top of the board. What is the situation I now face? And he put these 9 boxes. Now, what he proceeded to then do was in each box, he wrote few words. And in some of the boxes, he didn't even write a word. He actually created a little diagram. And now by that time, I am already good 12 years into a concentrated journey. So by that time, I've figured out, even if I wasn't fully conscious of what I was doing, that more than trying to capture every word he was writing, and what that meant, I recognized that there was something else going on. That it was, often you think about a teacher making transmission through words. This was a different kind of transmission. This was a quiet, silent transmission. And I recognized that what I was in the presence of was an opportunity to, I didn't have that word then, but I will now describe it as I was in the receipt of an operating system, a process operating system, a mental, mind working operating system, a psycho-spiritual formation operating system, a way of engaging with life operating system. And part of me was mesmerized. Part of me did try to understand what it was in every aspect. But what I did understand right there and then was that those boxes that he drew on the board, they were actually not limitations. What he said, what he was exempling was, look, I have a question to think about. Instead of thinking about the question, I'm actually going to give myself the permission to open 9 windows into this inquiry. So instead of being limited and contained by the definition of the question, I'm actually going to open for myself a huge, vast vista to explore the question. And he proceeded to populate this, which I later started to call loom, or understood was a loom, and later described to myself as loom work. Now, little did I know back then that it will impress itself and imprint itself and engrave itself so deeply on me, and there was probably some faculty nature that was anyway prime in me that was ready for that, but that was going to become a second nature for me. And that one practice of developing loom work approach was actually going to catapult me into a very successful, lucrative career in business. Because I would, 15 and 20 years later, find myself with leadership teams who needed to answer strategic kind of challenges, and I would lead them through a loom of inquiry about the challenges that they were searching to address. So all that occurred in 15, 20 minutes. It was one of those moments that I later coined as searing moments. And there is something about searing moment in another conversation with Jeff Vanderkloot, because we also, right at the time when we talked about loom work along the Epoch culmination journey, we also brought the idea of searing moments to represent the idea that at specific times in your life you have encountered, either by design or by luck or by judgment, sometime inspirational, sometime painful and difficult moment that carried a learning and developmental and evolutionary potential that if you then are able to source and slowly, gradually unpack, then the content that was seeded in that one moment in time and got sealed into every cell in your system will give you fuel for tremendous development possibility. And at a different time, when we talk in the next boxes about healing and healers as one of the other faces, we will come back to that, because part of that was a rewrite of what some people describe as trauma and the potential learning of trauma. And I in a way uplifted some of that potential into, well, the deeper appreciation of searing moments. But all that occurred in those 15 minutes or so, and then something else happened, and other people gathered, and the meeting proceeded, and nobody thought too much of it. It was just another moment in time. For me, it became something that I pondered for many years and started to offer yield, development yield and practical yield, and enabled me to be very successful in some of the work that I do. And we will talk more in episode 3 about some of the practical applications of loom work, some of which we already mentioned, but we will go deeper on that in episode 3. So the salient message in this was, again, the invitation to pivot from thinking one-dimensionally to contemplating multi-dimensionally. So there is a pivot from thinking to contemplating, and there is a pivot from one dimension to multi-dimensionality. And multi-dimensionality in the concurrency of those multi-dimensions. Now, mind you, when I was exposed to this back in '92, I didn't know anything at the time about complex systems and those realms that I will get exposed to 10 years later, such as complex systems and chaos theory. But when I discovered those adjacent sciences and mind mapping, which became very popular with various technologies, when I was discovering these in the early 2000s, I've had a decade of those inner scaffolds getting ingrained in my system. So I said, yeah, of course. And I never conflated or coupled the two, because for me that represented a living, breathing kind of a process technology. And so that's why when there was the question of, so how will we make space, I said, let's bring the loom work technology into it, and let's use loom work as a way to help us answer the question of how do we make space. And let's embrace this as one of the contemplative arts, because what is it we do when we contemplate? We create a template to engage with the CON, which in esoteric schools will represent, well, the carbon, the oxygen, the nitrogen, the three building blocks of the atmosphere, if you like, the permit organic life. It represents the universal property of the threefold systems that support life. So we literally creating a template that enabled us to source universal principles that can then be energized. Because ion is a representation of energy. So whenever anything is ionized, it is what we mean is all the words in the dictionary with ion at the end. It means that some process generated a charge, generated energy. So contemplation was a way to process energy and process new knowledge. And we were about to embark on different contemplative arts, and loom work was going to be a big part of it. And so when we approached this, I said earlier in the session, we were going to have to work on creating space, and the inquiry of how and why to make space will lead us to why and how to contemplate. And we said, let's spend some time on why and how to contemplate. And here is literally some of the early way. You have not, some of these slides I haven't changed. I just, late last night I said, let's pick this up and bring it into our conversation today. And this is what we did then. We said, well, for a start, sometime you can build a legend into the loom as another dimension. And I said, let's reflect on the challenge and the need and the technology as we embark on the idea of contemplation. And this is where I introduced loom work and share the origin story of loom work, which I describe as the second contemplative technology. And then what I attempted to do was to show that you don't need to follow any linear fashion. You could go anywhere in the loom, anywhere you like. And I said, so you could decide to go, well, so loom work in that, if you think about it, the word looming means something that's emerging or something that's about to happen. And I'm proposing that loom work offers, through the idea of looming, that sense of facilitating what is emerging or creating space for an emergent future. So as we embarked on this, I said, look, you can go and choose to begin with populating the challenge, or you could go first to the need. And you could literally work diagonally, horizontally, vertically, as you said earlier, Karen, not think that you need to follow any formulaic way. And I said, well, so the first challenge to actually contemplating is that as you appraise the human situation, the human is crowded, very, very crowded within. And not only is it very crowded within, we are now living inside a jam-packed place without. If you went back to the 12th century, or even to the 17th century, it wasn't as packed as it is today. And not only that, this is the condensed low conductivity end of the universe and the creation. So there is a triple whammy here in that challenge. Now, when I did that, I said, we've got to demonstrate, I have to demonstrate that the loom work is not two-dimensional. So I said, let's do this. Instead of going to the next box on the loom, let's go deeper into that one box and actually develop that and show that part of the idea of loom work is that you can develop a loom to each and every aspect, each and every frame, each and every portal on the loom. So I said, let's go deeper on this one. And I said, let's imagine, let's contemplate in metaphoric and practical terms the journey of the last 400 years. And I said, can we all imagine, please, that if you lived in the 1600s, the electromagnetic pressure that you experienced in metaphoric terms, let's say it was 100 volts. You know, most people, they died within a few kilometers away from where they were born. Of course, if you join one of the crusades, journeys, or another rare entrepreneurial expedition, you were the exception. But most people lived and knew the very people in the village around them, and there wasn't exposure to mass media. You know, they saw the religious figure of the village or the merchant of the village, and that's as much as there was. So I said, let's imagine that was living a life with intensity and pressure of 100 volts. Well, let's imagine that when you came back in the 1900s and you are now into the Industrial Revolution, and there are already factories, and the modernity project is significantly underway. Imagine that the electromagnetic pressure more than doubled itself, but at least doubled itself, and you're now living a life. The intensity of impressions is at 200 volts, so you'd be more crowded with impressions. But then imagine that you came back to 1970, just in 70 years, not only with radio signals, but now television signals and all other electronic signals. We're still pre-internet phase, but we are living busy city life in many places all around the world, and the electromagnetic pressure of that, the intensity of impressions and commerce and society and media, imagine that represents 20,000 volts. So for wherever the intensity of the impression from outside increases, you need to increase the intensity of pressure from within to be able to withstand it. And then I said, let's skip another time to 2020, the internet revolution, the smartphone revolution, social media revolution, and we are now looking at maybe 200 million volts. That was 2020. I don't know what it is today. It's probably 400 or 500. Obviously, the numbers are just a way to try to appreciate the rapid. It's in business terms, you'll say it's a hockey stick chart. It's an exponential chart. And so I then said, well, if you look at this, what does it mean? Well, if you consider the human condition and the byproduct of this, what does it mean to be a human at this time? What are the below the line pathological side effects of living in such an intensity, needing to face this crowded intensity? Well, below the line, you will suffer auric implosion, loss of the sense of self. This is what we are saying implicit in this, is that part of your sense of self is because you're actually able to hold a space of who you are. But when you face such a intensified messages 24/7 with many young people living with a smartphone next to their head, even in their sleep, you lose the boundary of who and what you are. And so much of the depression and the anxiety, depression, what is the word depression? Depress. You are facing tremendously deep pressure from the outside on you that cause depression. I know the psychologists will say, well, that's a very shallow description of depression. Depression has other implications, but I'm saying no. There is actually deep insight, invisible insight, that some of the pathologies and many of the syndromes we are now seeing with young people, some of those can directly relate to this intensified pressure, where they are not able to find themselves, and they discover from very early age that they need to define themselves, not in relation to themselves, but in relation to all the impressions they discover on social media. And the other pathology that I choose to highlight here, I could literally highlight 20 others, but I've chosen to highlight only 2, is that therefore one of the ways people find that they are able to resist that intensifying pressure is to get so singularly focused on one thing, their hobby, their passion. In many cases it's wonderful, but in certain cases that passion is totally centered on a polarized opinion of one kind or another that as a result of that then get potentized into becoming a possession, which is what I alluded to earlier when I talked about the nature of the lower occult, the aggregated human energy potential accumulated through history that essentially operates on and through the operating system of polarization. So, but you can't blame them, because when a person is facing 200 millions voltage of pressure, where will I find something? Well, so if I find something that I can get hold of, I will hold very strong to it, because I need to find my identity. And my identity will give me a sense of security, because it will give me a sense that I'm in control. This is why much later in the Universalis research and in the Making Space research, we will come into, what about surrendering the need for identity? What about surrendering the need to be able to define who and what I am? What about that as a central gate into the Universalis Project? But if I am to surrender the need to be defined by a certain identity, what will replace the need that identity and the control and the safety of knowing who and what I am about that provided me? So that's to be explored in future conversations. Because I'm still tracing what we just did originally with creating space. And we then offered 2 sample pathways. Again, you could sample many others, but against the intensified pressure of 200 million volts, one way, and that became very popular throughout the 20th century already, the idea of finding higher cause, if you like, that was part of the ideological age, one of the ways to describe the 20th century is that it was the ideological age, the first 2/3 of the 20th century. Postmodernity, if you like, became a new ideology that attempted to discredit and release all ideologies. But in itself became another way for people to decide that they are championing a cause. And for many it was the company they work for or the other social cause they choose to champion, many of which often is wonderful. But by the way, can also turn into a possessive thing, and then it becomes counterproductive. And then what begins as wanting to serve a cause leads to destabilizing, extreme, militant expression. All because it's about how will we counter that intensity. And this is very abbreviated. We could stay with this for much longer time as we did when we initially explored this. But I wanted to get to this point, which was option 4 was offered, well, how will you actually expand the intensity of what you're about? It's not by expanding the intensity of what you're about, but truly by activating your loom inside, by connecting through the loom work to the mid-space and the deep space generative contemplation, such that whatever you're embarking on, you're not embarking on as individual person trying to approach a question. You're actually embarking with the inner cosmology of the loom you're cultivating, or if you like to internalize it by way of thinking in a broader way about human life. Because when my teacher said to me, never again approach a question in a singular way, he was actually implicitly also saying, do you realize you are not a singular being, you're not a singular entity, you are a multiplicity in one. So if you approach anything in singularity, what you're implying is that you are shutting down the many other lives of you, and you only give expression to one life of you, which can only be limiting and debasing the human from its fuller promise, if you like, subjecting the human more to animalistic expression, because a tiger is a tiger is a tiger. And yeah, it may have 2 modes, or maybe 3 sometimes. It may be just awake and relaxed, and it may be in an attack mode. But that's more or less what it does. And yeah, it looks after its little ones as well. But so that's the range. And as I said on another occasion, some people who own their dogs will argue with me that their dog has not 2 moods, but 16 moods. Great, so they have a special dog with 16 moods. But generally, it's limited. So when a human imposes upon himself, herself, a limitation that narrows the range to one expression, to one dimension, it allows, in that case, the human lowers its range into the animalistic range rather than actually living into the universal possibility of human life. So that was the bigger proposal in the idea of activating loom work. Now, I did all that merely to instantiate that I didn't want anybody to think that the words or the sketch or the whatever that we put into the loom is an end stop. No, it's a starter. The whole idea of loom work was to recognize that everything is the starter leading to something else, and every portal leads into another portal. And actually part of the Universalis Project is treating life not as a closing of possibilities by offering final answers, but by opening those to open-ended inquiries. So we then said, well, The human is in a stop situation within a stop situation. Again, there's no need to elaborate on that because we addressed more of that in the first episode and we didn't actually open it back then. And then I said, well, what will I pause here to build on the challenge? Well, let's recognize that the human is meant to be a self-starter. And that for the light within to be seen, it needs to be switched on. So if part of the premise of bringing online and activating the loom work is to actually bring to life the cathedral within, the fact that the human was now entering an evolutionary possibility where life is, so much it was about the outside, we became so very interested in the last few decades in the interior. Yes, that was part of the answer to what was the 3,500 years journey about. It was activating and preparing the conductive possibility of the human on the inside in preparation for universal life. So that is what we wrote there. And what was the need? Well, the need was to make space. And the need was to, in that, become tethered to a higher source. Such that those higher sources, when they become tethered and we become tethered to them, they afford us their space. So that's again the idea of when you embark on a project, never embark on a project on your own. Always bring the help you need to embark on a project. And such that you let the universe discover its exalted dance in you. It's a very high idea that we will come back to in the Universalis Project. It begins with how we each want to develop in ourselves. And yet the bigger idea is really how do we allow the universe to liberate through us. And then I added the idea of the permanent line inquiry that we touched, that you could literally live into this inquiry through your sleep. And sometime I've always, from the time I remember myself, I will always have a pad next to my bed, because I sometimes would wake up in the morning or in the middle of the night when I'm working on a difficult challenge and I get something coming through, because the permanent line inquiry is working even when I'm watching a movie or doing the dishes or going for a run or swimming. I used to have a notebook next to me in the swimming pool in the gym. That's when I'm back in Seattle, not here in Florida, because I do swim in the ocean here. And because I would be swimming laps and I would have answers coming through my swim. And the challenge was, can I keep this one permanent line thread that's appearing, and the second and the third? So there you go. One of my applications for loom work was, how do I hold it while I'm swimming for half an hour? That became one of the practice areas, practice opportunities for me while I'm swimming. So I am working hard physically, and in another space in my mind, I'm doing something else, which is part of the practices that I've been cultivating for now 3 or 4 decades. And then there was one more, and just drop it here very quickly, was the idea of the third technology was mindful devotional gazing. What that idea was, that as Karen suggested earlier on, I think in our first conversation, that you could work with certain natural principles, natural laws, that I could use any template. That's the idea of contemplate. I can literally use any template that is rooted in, sourced in core natural laws of how the universe works, and I could use it as a filter, as a devotional, mindful way to look at the world with. And one of the things I've shared extensively in the Epoch journey and also on other portals conversations was this map, which was the map of the 3 lines. Right, here it is. Okay, so it's the idea that there is the natural line of development, the living as life was meant to be. And there is the condition line and the evolutionary line. Now, I'm not gonna do now the further definition and elaboration of that. That can be found on, particularly if you go to episode Co-Creating Humanity's Future number 3. I believe right there I'm telling the story of how you can see different events in history through these. This is an example of why and how will these appear. This became this mental model, this template that I've used in a mindful gazing way, gazing at the world, gazing at history, gazing inside myself. Where am I arresting myself in my own conditioning? Where have I still allowed, with all that I've done, pain and trauma and distrust, hold me back from discovering the fuller, more kinder, generous nature of the human possibility? And how may I be able to use the new permissions that are opening up such that I will melt these in myself? Sometime, if I can't do it in myself on my own, do it actually together with others. Sometime do it in front of others, such that as I do this in myself, I don't actually do it for myself. I do it as a facility for others, but in a way that gives me extra power to address what I sometimes find very challenging in my own journey. That was all part of what was sourced by using this third contemplative technology of making space, because you use one set of scaffolds to, very much in the way Kyriaki you were describing, a way to study history. Because as you were saying, we can look at this diagram and travel to Rome and find Rome in this picture, and certainly ancient Greece, and so on and so forth. So that is the way I thought I would share the way we started the journey into space making. Now, what we are embarking on is to go beyond that and include so much more. And what I intuited and felt was going to be useful is to actually put it in context of the work and the journey that we've done so far. So we have retraced some of the journey with space making, why the question, the inquiry, the challenge of space making emerged, how it emerged inside the context of the Epoch discovery, Epoch culmination, Epoch emancipation journey, and how that reasserted itself into the Homo Universalis research, and how the art of contemplation and loom work inside it became important. So, I know I said a lot, and you have practiced with me space making, so I'm going to go quiet and be silent for a few moments to give you a chance to speak to this experience. I would say this before I do. I just appreciate very much being able to be in this space together with you, because there's just no way to trace this without you facilitating and helping co-create the ecology into which this can be journeyed into. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Aviv. Brilliant. And just to add something very small, when you introduced us first the loom technology, I applied it, and the more I applied it, the more it gave its fruits, and I started to apply it in everything, and in some inquiries, I was putting the boxes, and after a certain time, okay, in the beginning you write easily, let's say the first 5 or 6 boxes, but then you stretch, and then something completely new comes. And the more I was doing it, it was like the boxes started to be filled on their own. And I'm not just saying this as a mental exercise, but truly as a way of living and as a way of finding options in the various applications, in the problems we are met with in life, and to really train our whole being and our perception that there are many solutions. It's not just one way. I think we have been trained to the specialization made us monolithic, and maybe what you explained there with the possession, maybe it's due to this fact of the increase of potency that is upon us. But the loom is such a liberating tool and practice, and the more you do it, the more it bears its fruits. So thank you. It's a magical tool.
Well, thank you, Kyriaki. I can reveal here that both of you have shared with me over the last 2 years many of the looms you've created. So, the beauty of this is that it became a transferable technology. You were not doing my looms, you were creating your own looms. You were discovering your own contemplative liberation, which was a proof point that it was working. Again, you are not journeying in my footsteps, you're journeying in your footsteps, doing it in the way that you are inclined, in the way that you are wired. And some of the looms from each one of you included artwork and color codes and all sorts of beautiful things. So I'd say this and be open and transparent about it.
Yes, thank you, Aviv and Kyriaki. I'll pronounce your name right at the end. It's not a lot I can add, really. I think so much has been said. But just as you were talking, I just felt the very organic nature of looms and how it's a little like each of the squares or circles or whatever they may be, a little like seed pods that in a way have their own organic life, and that the harvesting is kind of what we were talking about. And just another aside, almost a spin-off, I think, from the whole concept of multiplicity is when I think about value, and I think about it artistically, and you look it up in the dictionary, it talks about hues. You can think about values to do with hues. And that's a little bit like a loom is a key, and that's another key into something. So instead of thinking about what do I value, and it's a bit linear and it's a bit one thing, if you think of all the different hues and nuances, a little bit like the loom, or you could make a loom of it, you're opening into it, and then you can apply that same idea to anything that's like the elements of language or shape or color, and suddenly you're entering, and this is a whole space-making technology in itself, because you're entering into domains that, and if you add the organic nature as well, you've got, it's a universal playground that we're invited into with these contemplative technologies that you've been introducing us to. So thank you.
Well, Thank you so much, Karen and Kyriaki. So in what you started to paint there, Karen, you are making an invitation. Anybody that, if you stayed with us through to this point, begin to develop your own looms, whatever you're working on. And what Karen just started to hint, we will come back to in the third conversation, where we will explore some of the practical applications, because like just to seed this, often when people run into conflict is because they're actually in a crowded space. And they think they can solve the conflict in the crowded space, when what they need is to make space, make a new space. And if you can make the new space, inside the new space that you made, you can actually solve the problem or resolve the conflict. So there is so much more to open here in terms of the practical application for life and living and relationship, and for professional as well as spiritual dimensions. So that's the Universalis Project number 2, a journey into making space and into loom work and the art of contemplation. If you stayed with us through to this point, we look forward to seeing you on episode 3. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Along with our website at portalsofperception.org, Portals is also available on YouTube and on all podcast platforms, as well as social media. You can become an active member and join the conversation in community events. And you can help us get the word out by liking this content and by sharing it with your friends.